Good evening. It's Vaishakhi Day in Sri Lanka and Prime Minister Narendra Modi is their chief guest. It's his second visit in 2 years. The Lankan Prime Minister and President have visited India 6 times in this period. Prime Minister Modi certainly has intensified engagement, putting Buddhism and culture at the center of his policy. On Gravitas tonight, we examine how religion may be reshaping Sri Lanka's perception of India from a regional bully to a Buddhist friend, and how this is a well-calibrated strategy on India's part to counter China's growing influence in the region. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. The headlines this Thursday. After years of dragging its feet, India reaches a decisive phase on the triple talaq debate. Supreme Court begins daily hearing to decide if the practice must be banned. India's chief economic advisor Arvind Subramanian slams ratings agencies for not upgrading India, says agencies like Standard & Poor's have poor standards. Idiot, incompetent, liar, unqualified. These are the words Americans most frequently use to describe their president. A survey finds his approval ratings have tanked further. North Korea demands the handover of terror suspects who allegedly plotted Kim Jong-un's assassination with a biochemical substance. Pyongyang insists they acted at the behest of US and South Korea. It's been billed as a religious visit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's 2-day visit to Sri Lanka to mark the anniversary of Buddha, but it's also time for hard sell on the business front and, of course, on strategic issues. WION's Padma Rao reports from Colombo.
Prime Minister Modi has arrived in Colombo on his first religious visit. On Friday, he, along with representatives from 85 countries, will mark the birth of Gautam Buddha at the UN Vesak Day celebrations. It's the first time the event is being organized in Sri Lanka. Amidst all the ceremonials, including visits to temples that underscore the civilizational ties between India and Sri Lanka, there will be time and space for Modi to connect with his hosts, President Sirisena and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. Modi is expected to focus on a number of development projects the two sides have agreed upon. India-aided development projects. These include a solar power plant in TRINCOMALEE and a 500 megawatt LNG-fired power plant, joint development of 84 oil tanks, road and rail projects in TRINCOMALEE, MANNAR and JAFFNA. But Modi will also stress the need for Colombo to address the concerns of the Tamils in the north. Also, India's security concerns, notably Colombo's close ties to China and its indebtedness to that country, amounting to billions of dollars. This is money that Colombo cannot repay, so it is surrendering control and ownership of ports and airports to Chinese companies. With Chinese submarines and naval vessels docking regularly at Lankan ports, India is clear that its security red lines have been violated. Sri Lanka therefore must respect those concerns. How and in what manner is something that two countries have to work out. In Colombo, with Padma Rao, WION.
And we will be joined by WION senior international correspondent Padma Rao from Colombo in just a bit. We have with us in the studio my senior colleague and senior editor here, Surya Gangadharan. Good evening, Surya. We've listed a whole lot of things that will be on the agenda that India and Sri Lanka have to work on. So what exactly, if we were to say, this visit is about and how significant?
I think primarily this is a cultural connect, and since China took up the flag of Buddhism some years ago, which Manmohan Singh at the time cottoned on to, India has been reactively so, but even so, moving forward on the Buddhist front itself and trying to reappropriate those cultural symbols, that in a sense also embody our own ties to this region. And I think this visit is primarily that, but it's also about the other issues that stand between Sri Lanka and India. Development projects are one. We'd like the Sri Lankans to move forward on various MOUs that we have signed. We'd like them to clear them at the earliest so that we can begin implementing them. I think more important is the fact that this is also about competing with the Chinese. And given the hold that the Chinese presently have in Sri Lanka, where they are taking over projects, ports and airports because the Sri Lankans can't pay for them, can't pay for all those loans they took. I think for India now, the question is how do we ensure that the balance is maintained in the relationship with Sri Lanka and it doesn't tip entirely over on one side.
Right. Of course, Buddhism was part of India's diplomacy in the 1950s and has been revived. What sort of response has this got from Sri Lanka? Is it changing perceptions? Is it ridding them of the negativity that they saw India with?
I don't think the negativity can be entirely dispelled because there's always an elite in these small countries that sees India as a bully. You know? But I think to the extent that among common people there is a perception of India as other than this overwhelming landmass so close to their shores, I think Buddhism helps in that sense. And given the fact that Prime Minister Modi himself is a fairly religious figure, he visits temples in Sri Lanka. Wherever he goes, he makes it a point to visit some place associated with the faith. I think that also adds to gives another impression of India, which is positive.
Right, and the sheer volume of political engagement is something that has been remarked upon. Modi is going for the second time in 2 years. The Sri Lankan president came thrice. The Sri Lankan prime minister has come thrice. So there is a lot of talking happening. But what is it resulting in concrete terms?
I think diplomacy is never about instant something happening, some meeting happening today and a result tomorrow. This is a long haul, you know. And India has to work at it. I think given the fact that there's been so much neglect of Sri Lanka in the past, Manmohan Singh never visited that country because there were so many issues between us. I think for Prime Minister Modi, in a sense, he's now catching up with that entire period when there was nothing happening. And in that sense, attitudes have to change. China has a head start. There's a lot of work ahead. It's not going to be easy, but that effort has to be made.
And are we gaining substantively in this neighborhood first policy? Last week we saw that satellite, the SARC satellite being launched, and all these heads of state coming on one platform and congratulating Modi, including the Sri Lankan leader. And now this visit, so not just Buddhism, but in terms of investment, in terms of more engagement, because the Rajapaksa government had a clear tilt towards China in terms of getting weapons and credit. Is Sri Lanka somewhere rebalancing it?
I think Sri Lanka is trying to rebalance, but the reality is when you owe China so many billions of dollars and you can't pay them back, then there's the tilt in a sense is already more pronounced than ever before. India has to try and restore that balance. How will they do it? I mean, that's really the question now.
And how do you see another set of experts or critics or whatever you call them saying that Colombo is in a comfortable place right now. It's looking at India and China, and this is a race between two big neighbors, and whoever offers more is going to get the cake.
I think in a sense, many of our neighbors are very comfortably placed, you know, because they can play off both China and India. Sri Lanka is doing it, Bangladesh is doing it, Nepal has started doing it. And incidentally, you mentioned this conclave of leaders getting together. On May the 15th, there's going to be another conclave of leaders to put their stamp on OBOR, the One Belt, One Road initiative of China's. So this competitive kind of thing is going to continue, you know. In a sense, it's good because it keeps us on our toes and it underscores ever more than before that we have to stay focused on our region because that's primarily where our security interests are at stake. And in that sense, I think Modi is walking the talk.
Also the first Prime Minister to be going to Jaffna?
He's been there before. I think 2015 he was there. And the word is he's going again to, I think, inaugurate some projects that we built with Indian money. There's also a hospital he's donating to the Sri Lankans tomorrow. So all in all, it's a good visit in that sense, good on optics, good on conveying to the Sri Lankan people that India is there for a lot more than just, pushing people around and for diplomacy and all that. But this is a hard work that Modi has set for himself, you know. And the rewards are not going to come tomorrow or the day after. It's a very, very long haul.
And in terms of the personal chemistry or the personal equation that he shares with the current Sri Lankan leadership, how much does that help? If it's
I think the role of chemistry is sometimes overplayed in this whole thing about between leaders. You know, primarily both sides are driven by their national agendas. Modi by India's, Sri Lankans by their own. But they also recognize that at some point, getting together with the leader, getting to know him better, you begin to understand each other better. So in that sense, it's a good move forward. Both leaders appear comfortable with each other. Let's hope it takes us somewhere.
Is there a realization in New Delhi as well that Sri Lanka is a sovereign country, that it has nationalistic aspirations, and we've seen it as an addendum to Tamil Nadu politics, and that has to be. I
think the advantage now is that the previous Manmohan Singh government was very dependent on Tamil Nadu for their political backing in Delhi. The current government is not. And if you read some of the remarks from some of the opposition leaders in Tamil Nadu, well, for the first time they're talking fairly positively of the visit to Sri Lanka. So in that sense, being freed from this domestic burden, in a sense, is good for the Prime Minister. You know, he can formulate and shape policy. He has autonomy in that sense to work out a set of policies that will serve India well and Sri Lanka also well. Because your neighborhood is critical, you know, you can't afford to alienate them. And the fact that you don't have a domestic addendum now, I think helps us in that sense.
Right. I'm going to correct myself. I've just been told that he is not, in fact, going to be visiting JAFFNA, and Padma Rao, I'm told, is with us now. Padma, how is this visit being seen in Sri Lanka, and what sort of reactions is it getting?
Well, so far there haven't been many reactions as such, Palki, other than in the media, because as you know, he just arrived this evening at 6 p.m. But the media, the very fact that his visit has dominated the headlines of all the leading newspapers in Sri Lanka is quite significant, and also with a very positive top note. So there is a sense of guarded optimism in Sri Lanka, I would say, because let's not forget the last 2 years have not been, you know, the Prime Minister Modi, both sides have made efforts. There have been bilateral, high-level bilateral visits, but nothing has moved beyond that. Not all that can be laid at the feet of either the Sri Lankan government alone or the government in New Delhi alone, because there are a lot of domestic issues within Sri Lanka which are yet to be solved, and there are mounting problems with external debt. There are mounting problems with the joint opposition, which is objecting to many of the moves being made by the current government or even being suggested by the current government, and some of them include India and involve India. So as I said, it's a guarded optimism. We will know more tomorrow.
Right, and Modi is also the chief guest on Vaishakhi Day, Padma, and this is being seen as part of his effort to rebuild India's Buddhist bridge, if I may, to the world. How important is that strategically, and how is it perceived in Sri Lanka?
Yes, it's Vaishakh Day. It's not to be confused with Vaishakhi in India. It is the day, you know, which is coincidentally the Buddha was born and attained nirvana and attained an enlightenment all on the full moon in the middle of May. So this is that big day, and this is the biggest event. It's like Diwali for Sri Lanka. And the fact that, to come back to your question, the fact, which is a very good question, why did Prime Minister Modi choose this day? Because I think he thinks, and I think that the Indian government is finally being pragmatic enough to realize that the majority religion in Sri Lanka is 70.19% of Sri Lanka, of a population of 20 million, is Buddhist. So, you know, and we, compared to that in India, we have a relatively small population, which is ironical because that is where the religion was born. We only have about 8.5 to 9 million Buddhists, that is 0.7% of our population. So perhaps because of that, up to now, consequent and subsequent governments in India have laid more emphasis on the historical relationship with the Tamils of the north and the northern and the eastern provinces, and not much has been done or said about the ancient link, you know, which goes back 2,500 years ago with the Buddha, with the Lord Buddha, and through him with Sri Lanka. So I think to address and to tap that as the commonality, as the mutuality, as the cultural link is a very, very smart move, a very sophisticated move, and it's bound to bring Prime Minister Modi a lot of goodwill here.
And if I could dwell on this a bit more, Surya, it's not just Sri Lanka. I understand that in his engagement with Xi Jinping as well, he brought this up. So has Prime Minister Modi made it an integral part of his international engagement?
Absolutely. I think it started with Manmohan Singh. I mean, let's give credit where it belongs. It started there, you know. Unfortunately, they were not able to take it forward perhaps to the level which Modi has been able to do. And that's also in tune with Modi's own religiosity. You know, he is a religious person, he is devout. And in that sense, when he goes and does the kind of things he does, whether it's in Nepal at the Pashupatinath temple or elsewhere in China and other places, there's a certain conviction also it carries. And in that sense, this is a good move. You know, it strikes a lot of chords among a lot of people in this neighborhood.
Right. And Padma, my final question to you. The elephant in the room is, of course, China. How much does India hope to counterbalance China's growing footprint in the region?
Well, I think China's presence is much larger, both in terms of investment as well as in terms of visible presence on the ground. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe did tell me in an exclusive interview to WION last month that, you know, he thinks there are more Indians in Sri Lanka than Chinese. But there is, I think, what's more visible, perhaps because of the racial difference, is other Chinese, and also the level of investment of the Chinese. India's investment is nowhere near there. Having said that, the kind of investment that India has done here, it has built houses for displaced people in the northern and eastern provinces. There is now this hospital being presented to the Indian origin Tamils, and there are various other things that India's laid railway lines. It has cleaned the Kankesanturai harbour. India has done a lot of mine clearing, land mine clearing in the war areas, in the previous war areas. So there has been a lot of goodwill from the Indians, but most of it, please note, has been concentrated in the north and east. So perhaps that is a reason that the Modi entourage had a last-minute change of mind, from what I gather, and decided not to go to Jaffna out of the northern province this time, but to go to a different area instead, where there are other kinds of Tamils who are not again to be confused with the northern and eastern province. These are tea plantation Tamils who were brought there by the British in the late 18th century, and they feel quite neglected, and they'd like greater representation in Sri Lanka, and they do have Sri Lankan nationality. But I think that is to start there, and also to go to the holiest temple, the Dalithamavaga in Kandy, where the temple of the tooth, where the tooth of the Buddha is. I think Dalithamagava, I'm sorry. That is a very, very, you know, it's a big sign that Modi is taking the majority Buddhist population of Sri Lanka very seriously, and perhaps for the first time so, which is refreshing for Indian foreign policy.
Right. Padma Rao, thanks very much for bringing us the very latest from Colombo. And Surya, thank you for adding perspective. This is a two-day visit. The Prime Minister landed earlier this evening in Sri Lanka, and we'll keep you on top of that story. We're taking a short break here. Still ahead, the International Court of Justice at The Hague will hold public hearings on the Jadhav case on Monday. We'll tell you what to expect.